So we've been talking about all this change, all this transformation, all this operational maturity. And I wrapped up the last segment talking about how the fact that a lot of people hear information, but they don't do anything about it. And this is because we don't plan. I can almost guarantee the majority of people that are watching this, this session won't have a business plan. They don't have a strategy. They don't have a exit strategy. They don't have even a annual plan of what they need to focus on and drive their business. And for a lot of us, we put it off. We make excuses why we don't do it. A lot of the excuses for a lot of people in this industry come down to two things. They don't really want to be held accountable. If they write it down, if they feel like if they write a plan down, then they're going to fail if they don't hit those things that they've written down. They're not confident in themselves to actually drive towards what they want. So it's easier to not write it because, well, then I've got nothing to be held accountable to. I don't feel like I fail because I rock up every day and I keep doing what I'm doing and running a successful business. The other side to it is a lot of us don't know how to do a plan. Everyone, when I mention a strategy and planning and things like that, they think it needs to be some big elaborate thing. I'm here to tell you that it's not. I'm going to show you some tools to use to plan out for a quarter, a year, longer. It doesn't matter. We just need to start to plan and start to do things. So take you through some tools and some methodology. One of my favorite things that I like to do as an advisor when I come into businesses, when I'm understanding who they are, what's working and what's not. When I have been in management roles before, I use this tool to get feedback from my team in a structured way. It's called the 4 helpful lists. We start with understanding what's right. The reason why we start here is, apart from it creates a lot of positivity, it's actually the hardest thing when you do things. We in this industry always look at what's broken, but when you stop to think about what's right, you start to engage your brain a lot more. You start to think about, what am I doing well that I can leverage more? What positives are there in the business? It creates a sense of pride, but also clarity on that we can leverage and utilize more. When you're doing this as a group, it also creates a lot more buy-in because people start to feel more open that they can have these conversations. We're talking about what's working. That's already a positive vibe. But you start to notice the other 3, what's wrong, what's missing, and what's confused. Once we've done the positive spin, we open up the negative. And this allows us to segment the negative into useful information. If you've ever done a feedback session with people and you just ask what's wrong, it often turns into a whinge session. But when you stop and think about what's negative in our business, well, is it wrong because it's broken and we need to change something? Is it negative because it's missing and we need to add it? Or is it confused because we're lacking clarity around it? When you start understanding that, you start to get a lot more productive feedback. So even if you're not doing it in a group and you're like a single business owner, this is a really good tool to get a lot of your thoughts out and put it into these lists. Because what you do once you finish up and fill out these lists, you then can start to see themes, our core issues. You might see that across what's wrong, missing, and confused is a bunch of service delivery things that we can package together, and we can solve it from a bigger picture perspective than trying to solve symptoms. It might be our approach to our client engagements isn't right. Again, we can bundle those up. All of a sudden, you're getting bigger objectives that have more purpose, that have more steps in them to solve business problems and improve our business. rather than the way that we typically do it, which is just react to symptomatic problems and don't really look at the root cause. So I use this constantly. This is always a great place to start when we start doing some strategic planning. The next is a SWOT. And most people have heard this a lot, but a SWOT analysis is again a bunch of lists. It's what are our strengths? What are our internal attributes that give us a competitive edge in our market? What are our weaknesses? What are the internal things that hold us back, give us disadvantages? What are the opportunities there that in our client base in the market that we can exploit, that we can then grow our business or improve it? And what are those threats that are going to impact us? They don't need to necessarily be big and grand. But when you start to look at this, you start to really look at yourself from an external perspective. You might not really know this. You might have a feeling, you might write some stuff down, but again, bringing client centricity into this, you start to think about it. Why do clients engage with us? What strengths do we bring? Why are they staying with us? What are the things that they keep bringing up as our weaknesses? What don't we do well that they're annoyed with? What are the things clients are talking about? What are those opportunities that we can leverage in the space? And what are threats that are being spoken about in our industry and our clients that are going to impact us? I mentioned some threats at the start of all of these sessions around the major trends impacting our industry. Those are threats. How do they apply to you? Opportunities, we spoke about the solution categories and the changing client needs. What are there that would help with your clients? And those strengths and weaknesses, we spoke about the client centricity, we spoke about our operational maturity. How do our clients perceive? So this is another really good tool to start to develop an understanding of where we are now, our current state, and create things to focus on an improvement. The next thing we need to do is start viewing things from a proper business level risk perspective. What I mean by this is we think we talk risk, and in a lot of ways we do, but it's often tactical risk. I mentioned when I started in the industry, not enough people had backups. The main risk back then was the old server was going to die overnight and we wouldn't be able to recover. It wasn't that it was likely. It didn't necessarily happen that often, but things have changed more and more. Things have moved to SaaS, so a lot of us have got complacent around backups, but cybercrime has increased. So that impact on data, the likelihood of something happening has increased. You start to notice I'm mentioning two things here. It's the likelihood of something happening, and then what are the consequences? We don't really talk about that from a business perspective. Going back to that server, most of us used to sell backup from our perspective of if we don't have a backup, well, we can't recover. But what's that consequence for the client? We might assume that we talk that way, but I can almost guarantee most of us don't actually talk from a client lens. What is the consequence of a cyber criminal impacting their business? What's the likelihood of that happening? This sort of risk matrix is the way that we can frame it up, those conversations. And if we bring it back to our own business, we never think about the risks to our business. What's the likelihood of someone breaching us, getting into our RMM? What are the consequences to that? What can we do to mitigate that? What are we going to be able to do, not just from a technical perspective, but a policy perspective, a financial perspective? We need to broaden our thinking. And us going through this exercise for ourselves, apart from creating a risk register and then being able to mitigate these risks and work through it, all of a sudden you'll notice that the language that we're using has changed. We're focused on this for our own business and implementing that maturity, it's very easy to go talk to our clients about that and have those discussions again about their industry, ask more curious questions. You don't necessarily need to have the answer of how to mitigate it, but if you've uncovered a risk for someone, all of a sudden there's a further conversation to be had. And so once we're starting to build all of this up, all of a sudden we've got this action long list. For most people, can feel overwhelming. We want to get more mature. There's all these things to do across our business. We don't break it down, and we don't visualize it so others can get involved. So what we need to do is, here's an example of what I often do in the partners I work with. Once I see a program of work, I break it down for them to become digestible. And this is an example that I use to show people across a TSP business, what are all the things that we might need to do to lift our maturity. Some people take this and use this as a checklist for their own selves, but if you've just gone through those previous exercises, you hear things in the industry in general, coming up to conference as an example, all of a sudden you've got more action items. You need to list them out and then prioritize them, give them some structure of how you do it. If you're a one-person business, probably don't want to have too many things on the go because you can't change a lot. If you've got a team of leaders, well, they should be able to own their own functional areas and drive the improvements in those spaces. But they need to be structured and given a roadmap so people can buy into what's going to happen. But most importantly, so we can hold ourselves accountable, give ourselves some deadlines to work out how much capacity we've got to do these sort of things. We need to execute. Again, if we're going to transform ourselves, we actually need to do stuff. Transformation isn't just think that it's going to happen and magically it'll all just appear. There's a lot of work that goes into this over years and years. Again, going from one maturity level to another is 3 to 5 years of transformational work, let alone us changing our operating model and our business models. We need to get better at structuring this. From there, once we know all the activity that we're going to build, we need to stop and put measurements in place. What are our key measures for our financials, for our partners or our clients, our processes, our learning and development? This balanced scorecard approach, most people default to, let's check some KPIs at things. I get asked all the time by partners, what KPIs should I be tracking? Well, it depends what we're trying to achieve. What are our objectives? None of this is cookie cutter. So this method of breaking down, well, what is our objective from a financial perspective? What are the measures that we need to track to meet that objective? What are the targets for those particular numbers? And then what are the initiatives that we need to put in place to drive those? Again, we're getting that clarity, not just for ourselves, but when we've got a team, all of a sudden this creates clarity and ownership. This is where we start to lift that level of maturity. This is where we start to get a lot more results. It's something that not many of us do. Most of us, like I'll keep calling out, we don't measure our finances. We look at our bank. Do we have enough cash in the bank? And does our accountant tell us at the end of the year we're doing well? That isn't financial maturity. That isn't driving our financials to achieve results. That's a survival mentality. For us to thrive, we need to become a lot more proactive. And so giving you all these tools to roll out, to understand, to build out a plan. It's not very complicated, is it? You can start very simply, picking again finance. Well, we just need to fill up our financial capacity. What's going to do it? Well, it's the engagement revenue. How much do we need? And what are the things that are going to drive this? Then we've got it. Our previous slide with the roadmap. Does that roadmap line up with what our balanced scorecard shows? Well, if it does, great. Well, it all becomes more purposeful. If it doesn't, why not? Is it because we're focusing on the wrong things from a roadmap perspective, or are we measuring the wrong things from a scorecard perspective? Again, if you write this down, you start to create more clarity, because if it's all in your head, there's going to be multiple things that happen. One, you'll get pulled left, right, and center, so it'll be the strategy of the day because you're just reacting to everything. If you don't write it down, you won't build a full picture of something because you'll have assumed knowledge. And if you've got assumed knowledge, either you don't know enough and you're unconsciously incompetent, so you can't see the gaps. But as soon as you start to write stuff down, you start to see the gaps. But also, it's really hard to articulate to someone else if it's all in your head. A part of that process of getting team buy-in and driving a team is you need to be able to properly articulate these things with purpose and meaning. You're only going to do that is if you start to introduce that process of writing plans down. Write it down, tweak it, get feedback, improve it, and then roll it out and implement it. And it's a discipline that we need to keep driving over and over again. It's not a one and done thing. We don't just do a plan now and that's what's going to drive us forever. It's actually a revolving, it's a circle. It's continuous. And a simple discipline that I roll out, it's the same as nearly every strategic management framework, EOS, Stratop, Gazelles, OKRs. They're all the same basic principles. Set out an annual plan. Make sure you're meeting weekly to create accountability by reviewing progress against the objectives that were set. Review the metrics to make corrections. Regroup, reset for the next week and focus. Every month, reflect on the results that came from next month. What are you going to do differently in the future month? What needs to happen this month? Were we successful on delivering against our objectives for the previous month? And then a quarterly reset to go off site, have conversations with your people, set out the right things to focus on that quarter to execute against the annual plan. And it just keeps going on and on and on. You can evolve from that and start to have longer term strategies and exit plans and legacy plans and things like that. But for most of us, it's difficult enough to think about what do we need to achieve for this quarter or this year, let alone start to think 10 years in the future. So that's, for us, the best way is to start just plan out a quarter. I've given you a whole bunch of information. What do you need to do this quarter? What do you need to do the next? And then build upon there and then come up to next year and go, well, now I've got that rhythm. Now I've got that understanding. Well, I'm going to actually plan out what I need to do for this year. You can start all of this in very small steps. It doesn't need to be big and grandiose. And that's why most of us aren't progressing. That's why most of us aren't growing. We don't step away from our business. We get sucked into that business as usual because we don't have a plan written down. But then most importantly, we don't have an accountability rhythm in place to make sure we're actually progressing to that plan. People that do, and to be brutally honest, most of the high performers aren't doing anything that special. They might have a little secret sauce. They might have some extra high level talent, but ultimately you can just do better by having this structure in place to have a plan, work the plan, review the plan. It's as easy as that. You're not actually in competition with everyone else. You're in competition with yourself, and that's why most of us avoid it. But with these tools, hopefully it gives you some pragmatic, easy steps to implement for yourself and build up this discipline towards your transformation and operational maturity, because we need to. Now, if you're listening to all of this and you're like, I don't have the energy to transform over the next couple of years, I'm probably heading towards retirement, or I should just exit the business. You still need a plan for that. So understanding what you need to achieve, the steps to get there, that's a plan. While an exit plan is a lot different to a transformational plan, there's still a lot of value in taking control of your own destiny. Because otherwise, you're going to keep getting sucked into the fires during the day, the individual incidents, the gambling of trying to exit, all of that kind of stuff. The more structure and thought you put it into it, write it down, and then hold yourself accountable, the much more success that you're going to have. So that was the last sort of section before I dive in. I'll get Viv to stop recording because we'll start to wrap up, and I'll talk about